On today's True Crime, a shocking murder mystery full of cover-ups and conspiracies at the highest levels. Michael Francke had been recruited to clean up the deeply corrupt Oregon prison system. But the night before he planned to testify about the evidence he'd discovered, Michael Francke was brutally murdered, stabbed in the heart. Today, new details about who's really behind this horrific murder. His family says it is not the person who went to prison, but they believe it was covered up by people who had everything to lose. Who really killed Michael Francke before he could expose their corrupt secrets? Michael Francke's vicious murder and the intrigue around it has transfixed everyone. From a film starring a young Angelina Jolie to a hit new podcast, Murder in Oregon. New details are still being uncovered.
Michael Francke was murdered 30 years ago.
There was conversation among people that felt like this was meant for him. I always thought it was.
It's an incestuous bunch of criminals down here. Turns out there's an incestuous bunch of politicians, too.
It sounds like you guys were turning over stones and you found more than a few snakes.
Yeah, and a lot of them are still out there.
Michael Francke was last seen alive at his office building. His car was found, still in his office parking lot, with the driver's side door open. When no one could locate Michael, a team went to look for him and claimed to have performed an exhaustive search of the premises. But his blood-soaked body would not be discovered until 4 hours later, right outside of his office building, just over 100 feet from his car. Michael was found with his wallet and watch still on him. Only a briefcase containing discs and paperwork was missing, which held all of the documentation he planned to present the very next day to blow the lid off his corrupt department. They have never been recovered. Who would kill a man over those items? Questions about what really happened grew louder when the horrific murder was quickly dubbed by police as a car theft gone bad. Because as a man of 6'4", lots of people thought Michael would be able to defend himself. This man was sent to prison for life for Michael Francke's murder. And now, a recent development is throwing everything into question. What do we know about who really killed Michael Francke? Reporter Lauren Bright-Pacheco has been investigating this case. She's also the host of Murder in Oregon. It's a podcast. So Lauren, you used to work for this show. You've got impeccable taste about investigating concepts. You've been infatuated with this story for over a year. What drew you to it?
Well, Phil Stanford is a crime columnist from Oregon and a crime author, and this case became his personal obsession. He's followed it for 30 years, and it has more twists and turns than a macrame tapestry. It is this perfect medley of corruption, power, and government interference.
So Michael had been recruited to Oregon to clean up their prison systems, which is a big deal. So Michael soon discovered there were some serious problems in the way the prisons were being run. As an example, how do they deal with overcrowding?
So at the time, Oregon had a hot bunk program, and what that means is they would let prisoners out for a week. And in that week, other people would move in to their bunks. It was a way to solve overcrowding. But while the criminals are out, they're burglarizing homes, they're dealing drugs, they're doing what they do best. And then they go back into the prisons and they bring that with them. The corruption.
What?
And when you are dealing with drugs, you are dealing with a lot. You are dealing with drugs. You are dealing with a lot of money and very dangerous people who will do whatever necessary to protect themselves and their interests.
So Michael Francke goes in as a do-gooder, a modern-day Elliot Ness. He wants to expose this corruption that is rotting the foundation of the prison system. What had he learned already that might have made him dangerous to some people?
Well, he had an incredible moral compass, and he gets there in '87. This isn't your typical prison warden. This guy was a former judge. He played football in college, as you did, went to UVA Law School on a full scholarship with living stipend, an exceptional man, and he wanted to invest in childhood education. He wanted to keep people out of prison. He didn't just want to deal with overcrowding. But The problem is he started hearing from the same people who told the 1986 investigators, the same prisoners, the same correction officials, the same politicians, all gave him the same information. And he was actively investigating corruption at the time of his murder.
Had a lot of insights, but Michael would never get a chance to disclose what he knew. Instead, he was found in a pool of blood. He was stabbed in the heart. Now, there are a number of alarmingly suspicious facts regarding this case. For example, who was assigned to investigate the murder?
Remember when I mentioned the 1986 investigation? It was the same state police, the same local DA, were the same people who investigated Michael Francke's murder.
So police claimed, the state police, that the death was a botched car robbery. Yet no money was taken. But there was something missing that's an important clue.
Absolutely. His wallet was on him, money was in the wallet, his watch was on it, but what was missing was his briefcase. And in that briefcase would have been the floppy disks that would have contained the meat of the investigation that he was supposed to present the day after he was murdered to the Legislative Committee on the topic.
Let's go over here. Let's go through some of the big lingering questions about this mysterious murder. We made a map of the crime scene. This is the Department of Corrections property where Michael worked. And you may find this familiar, Lauren, because you actually have gone there. So since you did the homework on this, start with the startling discovery about the car itself. Where was it? And give us an example of the problems with the analysis by the police.
Okay, so this is where Michael Francke's car would have been, and that's where his deputy director discovered the car with the door open at roughly 7 p.m. the night he was murdered. Now, they performed an exhaustive, quote-unquote, exhaustive search of the building, his number 2 and number 3 in command. They went all the way to the top of the building, all the way to the bottom, but they never found his body, which was found on the north portico, which would have been right there. Yeah. And a television reporter at the time mentioned something interesting. His beeper would have been going off incessantly as they were calling to find him. So even if they couldn't see his body on the north portico, which is a fancy word for a porch, it would have been hidden, they would have heard the sounds. Now, if I were Michael Francke and I had been stabbed through the heart, I might try to go to the front door.
The main entrance to the facility, right
That
over
is
there.
where you probably would have had the greatest likelihood of running into people who were still there after hours.
So how did his body, if he was murdered over here by his car, get even to that portico area, especially if he was trying to get over here to the front entrance? How did he end up over there?
Well, that was a side entrance, and that would have been closer to his office. So there is the theory that perhaps he didn't realize how horribly injured he was, which, as we mentioned, he wouldn't have lived in an emergency room. That's difficult to believe. But he might have been trying to get to the phone. And that is just a theory. Other people have theorized that he was actually abducted, that he was murdered somewhere else, and that his body was dumped on that porch. Now, that is also interesting because, Dr. Oz, we mentioned that this is the car.
Yeah.
There wasn't a spot of blood near the car.
Oh, my goodness. But the door's opened.
The door's open. So if that was where the altercation happened and that's where he was stabbed, you're a heart surgeon. I doubt that he would have been able to get 50 feet without a drop of blood touching the ground.
Even with blood touching the ground, he wouldn't have gotten 50 feet. Where were the keys to the car?
The keys to the car were thrown to the side of that north portico in a ditch. And Michael Francke's body was discovered in a puddle of blood surrounded by the shattered glass he desperately, shattered while he was trying to get back into the building.
Folks, quick poll here, straw poll. Who here thinks this was a car robbery gone bad? Right, doesn't seem likely, does it? All right, up next, who wanted Michael Francke dead? His family says it's not the person who went to prison. So who was it? Who murdered him? Stay with us. We're back with startling new details surrounding the brutal stabbing of the highest-ranking prison official in Oregon, which many believed was a cold-blooded assassination. Police claim they solved Michael Francke's murder nearly 30 years ago. Or was it the greatest cover-up in Oregon's history? Lauren Brett Pacheco has been investigating this true crime story for the Murder in Oregon podcast. There was a suspect, I should point out to everybody, who confessed to the murder early on. So effectively, it was sort of solved or sort of seen, but police didn't really want to talk to him. They let him go.
It's interesting. So a man named Johnny Kraus confessed to the murder. Immediately after, he confessed to his mother, he confessed to his brother, he confessed to his girlfriend at the time, and he confessed to his parole officer. He knew things about the nature of Michael Francke's injuries and stab wounds that he would not have known had he not been at the scene of the murder or the actual murderer. Now, after he confessed, Pat Francke, Michael's brother, visited him in prison. And he gave him a little list, a note card, pressed it against the glass because he didn't want the correction officials to overhear the conversation. Johnny Kraus said, "You're on to something, Pat. This goes to corrections." Now, that hits the press, and immediately, Johnny Kraus is dropped as a suspect. He recants his confession, and he's granted immunity not to recant his recantation.
So I'm sorry, so if he didn't recant what he had recanted, he would be able to go free.
And at one point, we even have the police notes of a car ride he took with correction officials and the then DA. And he offered to take the police officers to the house near the building where Michael Francke was murdered if they wanted to see the murder weapon. And do you know what those police officers did? They passed. They didn't do it. And then Johnny Kraus is granted immunity not to recant his recantation. Why? We can only speculate, but I can tell you with pretty good assuredness that they did not like the people that that confession would have led to.
So seemingly out of nowhere, 8 months after Michael's murder, a small-time meth dealer named Frank Gable was charged with the murder. Seems like a pretty unlikely suspect. What kind of evidence did the police have against Gable?
Nothing. They did not have a shred of physical evidence linking Frank Gable to the crime. They gathered material witnesses who all had something to lose if they didn't agree to testify. These people were a motley crew of criminals and ex-cons and jailbirds, and they were granted leniency on already pending charges, or they were threatened with being charged with the murder themselves. And that is what put Frank Gable in prison for 30 years.
So he was convicted of Michael's murder in 1991. Life in prison without parole was the original sentence. And Michael's brother, Kevin, who says he believes Frank had nothing to do with the murder, is going to join us now from Portland. He's with our Portland affiliate, KGW-TV. Thank you again for coming here. I know you've dedicated your life to finding out the truth about your brother's murder. So, Kevin, your brother bravely decides to get involved in the Oregon prison system, try to reform it. He was apparently watching his back in the days leading up to his murder. Why did he say he feared for his safety?
The reason why is because he felt he was surrounded by people that he couldn't trust. And those people would be probably his number 2 man, Dick Peterson, and the person that was handling the legal affairs for the Department of Corrections, who was assigned to the Department of Corrections but was not an employee of the Department of Corrections. He was an employee of the Attorney General's office.
So you uprooted your entire life. You moved to Salem for Frank Gable's trial. Why do you believe the man who was convicted, Frank Gable, and sent to prison for your brother's death was innocent?
There is just a total lack of any evidence. He has an alibi. There is absolutely no physical evidence. And when I got my hands on the discovery, you could get in there and look at the witnesses that testified against him. Jody Swearingen was one where she had 40 separate interrogations. And she was a 16, 17-year-old girl. And over 24 polygraph tests where she was wired up and asked a list of names. For instance, they read off a list of about 20 names. And they came back later when she's wired up and says, "You hit on Frank Gable." And she didn't know Frank Gable at the time. So now she knows they're interested in Frank Gable. So now it's like a bizarre game of Clue. You know, you finally ask enough questions so you've got Colonel Mustard in the ballroom with the candlestick. And it takes 40 different investigative interviews to get to that point.
So coming up,
24 polygraph tests.
So coming up, Kevin's going to explain to us how he helped free the man accused of killing his brother and who he thinks was really behind the murder. Stay here. We're back investigating the brutal murder of Michael Francke, who was stabbed to death the night before he planned to expose rampant corruption within the Oregon prison system. Michael's brother, Kevin, joins us now from our Portland affiliate, KGW-TV. Kevin, you believed in Frank's innocence so much that you helped free him, the man that was convicted of murdering your brother. Explain what you uncovered.
What I uncovered was basically what I was explaining before. You had a tremendous abuse of the interrogation process, of the threats, the coercion, the abuse of the polygraph test. And this is with a group of a half a dozen witnesses that all groomed their testimony and created the testimony to create a case against Frank Gable. And they completely ignored the fact that he had an alibi. They completely ignored the fact that there was no physical evidence. They literally had to go to a True Value hardware store and buy a knife that they said was similar to the one that must have been used to kill my brother. That Frank Gable was probably in possession of a knife similar to that, even though they never found it. That's just obscene.
So let me read an excerpt from Linda Parker Neff's sworn statement about what she heard a high-ranking prison official say in reference to Michael's killers. I'm going to quote him. They could never get anything right. It was supposed to look like a suicide, and they botched it. He said they were stupid, too, in that Francke was found by a door he never used. These are all true statements, it would appear. The uncovering of statements like that and the court's refusal to allow Jenny Krause's confession as evidence at trial led a judge earlier this year to exonerate Frank Gable of Michael's murder. He was released from prison after serving nearly 30 years. An innocent man, 30 years, and you've seen what we've seen. It wasn't rocket science to figure out something was fishy. So, Kevin, what was it like to finally see Frank go free, acquitted now of murdering your brother?
It was like seeing Santa Claus, and he was for real. And that's no exaggeration. If you saw Santa Claus coming down the chimney and putting presents underneath the Christmas tree, that's exactly how I felt.
So Frank Gable may be a free man, but the state still has the right to appeal the judge's ruling and retry him. Now, let me bring back in Lauren Pacheco-Bright, who's been investigating this case. So what details have you uncovered are available for all of us to understand who could have been behind Michael Francke's murder?
Well, the only thing we know with 100% assurity is that Frank Gable did not commit that murder. At the building, the night that Michael Francke was murdered, was a man who was seen in the hallway, kind of loitering in the front lobby. He ran into a woman who worked for human resources at the building, so she would have known anybody, and they made a police sketch based on her description. Now, the then DA at the time hemmed and hawed and would not release that picture. First, he claimed that it wasn't good quality, and then he claimed that it looked like a lot of people. Well, it didn't. It was a handsome, dark-haired man who became known as the man in the pinstriped suit. We have spoken to no less than 3 women who were intimately involved with a man named Timothy Natividad, who was killed in a domestic dispute 2 weeks after Michael Francke's murder. And all 3 of those women claim that it looks exactly like Tim Natividad. Tim Natividad was a violent drug dealer known to carry a knife at all times. He was involved with the Kaiser Mafia, a local drug dealing group that dealt drugs in and out of the prison. And after Michael Francke was murdered, Tim Natividad came into a great deal of money. Suddenly had plans to move to Hawaii.
Lots of question marks, right, everybody? You know, you don't have to be an investigative reporter. You know, a lot of us average folks can figure this out. So with all the reports and files, Kevin, that you've been able to research over these years, who do you think was responsible for killing your brother?
The mastermind, I believe, was the legal representative assigned from the Attorney General's office. And he had a true reason to get rid of Mike, because this was all part of a cabal that took a great deal of profit from the drug community. And that drug community was not just in the joint, they were also dealing on the outside too. And there was prostitution, gambling. It was just a RICO cartel.
So for anyone who might have been involved with your brother's murder, and there could be some folks out there watching right now who are, what do you want them to know right now?
I'm still here, and I'm not leaving until we get this job done.
Good for you. Thank you for sharing your story, Lauren. Good to see you again. For not giving up as well. I think your brother will be proud of you. But we keep tracking any of these new developments. You can catch the podcast Murder in Oregon, Who Killed Michael Francke on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss out on new videos to live the good life.